by, in some respects, by embracing these sort of forgotten and cast-off elements of our cities, it really kind of amounts to some sort of love song for our cities. And so, this is very much a project that's close to my heart, and really, something that arises almost purely from my love of the city that I'm from and the city I grew up in. The other thing that I'd like to sort of begin to try and illustrate is how the very simple act of applying design and technology to a lost, cast-off space all of a sudden can generate some really startling things, not just purely design-wise, but across a wide range of topics with really sort of far-reaching implications. And so I'd like to sort of try and touch on at least some of those today to try and illustrate some of the potential that we can, as designers, etc., embrace in repurposing existing stuff. Let's start here, though. Does anyone have any idea who this man is? Okay, no, 0 people in here. That's really sad. He's kind of a personal hero of mine. This is Shigeru Miyamoto, and he is an amazing character. He is the fellow that created Super Mario Brothers. It's a pretty amazing thing, right? And so, why is James showing me the guy who invented Super Mario Brothers? Well, I just want to illustrate a very simple point by analogy, which is, I don't know if anyone here has played this game, and judging by the sort of general age, I feel like a few of you have. But it's actually a really simple game, right? It's a 2-dimensional game where you just run through the streets of this imaginary world. Yet, at the same time, it's almost infinitely playable. You can play for hours and hours and get sucked into this game. And about 3 or 4 years ago, there was an article in the New Yorker magazine where the reporter just simply asked it, why is this game so addictive? Why is it so endlessly fun? And his answer was actually a pretty interesting one. His answer was that he coded this game so that it was just filled with the innuendo of secrets. For example, if you jump up over here, like a beanstalk pops up, or if you go over to that little green thing, you can pop down into the secret world. And just the idea that there might still be stuff out there that you don't know about creates this sort of infinite playability and this sort of the sense, even though you know that the game itself is finite, that this world is infinite and that it has an infinite range of possibilities to explore. And so the simple analogy here is that with our cities as well, we have a very similar quality. So, any city really that's grown by accretion, like a coral reef, you can actually, at certain times, observe those sort of historical strata of that city and actually sort of endlessly explore some of the details and the complexity of the city. Or, not to be too literal here, this is on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, but there's times in which you can quite literally explore this sort of unknown underbelly of the city. So that's actually the train space that's underneath the manhole cover that I just showed you. And more to the point, this is Delancey Street, and it is directly on top of this, which is the Lowline space. So what is the Lowline? Well, the Lowline is an idea that we can use design and solar technologies to actually concentrate and irrigate natural light, treat natural sunlight like a liquid, and bring it down into this ancient space. Well, it's ancient by American standards, but bring it down into this space in order to actually foster photosynthesis and grow stuff, and in effect creating an underground garden. So this is that space at present day. And I just want to give a little bit of background as to where this is and why this is important, right? So I don't know if any of you are familiar with anything about this neighborhood, but this is a space that's set on the Lower East Side of New York. Lower East Side, 100 years ago, was the most densely populated place on Earth. This is where, well, if you've ever seen The Godfather 2, that's like kind of where they live. This is kind of the neighborhood that everyone, when they first came to America, moved to. And so it has this incredibly rich cultural heritage, this incredible density to it. Yet at the same time, because it was predominantly poor immigrants that were coming to this neighborhood, it is a neighborhood that has a profound lack of public space. And so even today, it's no longer the most densely populated place on Earth. Yet, at the same time, this is a neighborhood within whose bounds I think live something like 600,000 people. And 600,000 people in one little neighborhood is it's comparable to many actually significant cities. Yet, this is a neighborhood that has almost no cultural amenities and almost no public space. So it just so happens that in the exact center of this neighborhood, underneath Delancey Street, is an abandoned trolley terminal. So that's a trolley terminal that was built in 1908 and abandoned when the automobile finally and completely won. And it's about 60,000 square feet. I have no idea what that is in metric, by the way. And it's just sitting there, and it's been sitting there unused since the 40s. In spite of its really actually quite important position. I also want to highlight a couple other things about this image right here. Number one, it's literally at the foot of the Williamsburg Bridge. So this is at the node that connects Manhattan to Brooklyn, which is sort of increasingly becoming important. This is also at a location that connects directly to the subway. It's also where maybe something like 5 different ethnicities all sort of come to one little point. And as you can see, a lot of the surrounding neighborhood was quite simply knocked down at some point in the 60s in some sort of misguided attempt at urbanism. And so the Lowline actually, just because of the way it's situated, all of a sudden has this potential to begin to knit back together a historic community. This is just a simple graphic illustrating the amount of park space per person that live in this neighborhood versus the entirety of New York, etc. All right, and so taking a little trip back in time, this is a somewhat famous image from a book called How the Other Half Lives. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that book, but this was a very important work at the turn of the last century, which kind of exposed some of the living conditions in our cities to people who didn't really have a sense of what was actually going on down there. In this particular image, this was an infamous one. It's a bunch of children literally playing in a gutter next to a dead horse, right? And at the time when this came out, I guess it's still pretty shocking, but people were shocked when they saw this. And in America, this one image actually played a very large role in spurring forth like the new parks movement throughout cities all across the country. And so I'm showing you this image because this is actually taken right at the side of the Lowline. So the historical condition that existed back then, that lack of public space, is still something that exists today. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Is this working properly?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay, more or less. All right. So this is an overhead shot of that site, taken in the, I believe, in the 20s, and sort of like a sad time-lapse photograph. You can see how it evolves. And so you can see here, let me back that up. I want you to sort of pay attention to how many people are using this neighborhood, what the buildings are doing, the life on the street, and versus the number of cars as well. Right? Little by little, sort of classic case study of the death of the American city, right? And so, given the conditions that are there right now, all of a sudden we have this opportunity to use actually an unused space that no one even thinks about underneath this exact location to begin to actually rework the fabric of the city and knit it back together. So how do we do that? Well, one of the things that I've been working on for years is to design and work with solar redirection technologies, right? And so in particular, this is just a handmade prototype that we were working on literally in my friend's apartment. But the idea in a nutshell is that if you take natural sunlight, you can concentrate it down to a super concentrated bead, send it through a light pipe to another location, and then re-spread it back out. It's a fairly simple idea. It's just an optical device like a telescope or a periscope or whatever, but it also opens up all sorts of possibilities to where you can actually have natural light architecturally, right? And so in particular for this, well, let me show you a couple images. That's the collection mechanism, distribution mechanism. So if you start to apply some of those technologies in a really basic way to this space, which is entirely feasible, you all of a sudden start to get all sorts of startling results. And so we actually went down to the archives, pulled up the original engineering drawings for the site, and actually began to apply some of these technological systems as well as a really sort of basic level of design, really. And the things that start to emerge were actually pretty startling, I thought. And you end up with sort of the conversion of this lost sort of archaeological space into something that really actually becomes a positive asset for the city as a whole. And that's just sort of a shot of the entry. This is, I think, also, as with most technologies, this technology is a tool. And so I think it begins to open the door to any number of things, including sort of using technology, from our future to actually just reconnect directly to some of our past, right? So I think that the idea that we can actually cherish what's already down there and what's existing down there, and actually sort of bring that even more to the fore is actually one of the hallmarks of this project, and I think essential to sort of the respect that we need to afford the city. So how do we begin to do something like this, right? We have, this is a project that just comes out of nothing. There's no client, the city didn't ask for it, and all of a sudden it's kind of a real project. How did that happen, right? And so I think that begins to raise all sorts of interesting questions about sort of the future of how we deal with clients, urbanism, design, and where does that come from? Can it be something that can be actually democratized? And so one of the very first things we did was just quite simply bring on all of the sort of necessary consultants we needed to take on and begin to catalog the space, do our sort of basic research, right? The very next thing that we felt that we needed to do was to actually build a real-life version of this thing, at least in small part, to prove to ourselves that, that this technology would work and that we could achieve a very specific architectural effect with it, right? And so in order to do that, we actually turned to a website called Kickstarter. I don't know if you all are familiar with this website. It's one of several now crowdfunding websites. But what our intention was here was that given the fact that this is a project that has no developer, no client, no nothing, could we actually begin to look at doing something in which we enlisted the community itself to actually come together as a democratizing force to just improve their neighborhood? And so this is really just kind of the first basic small step in that direction, and who knows what the future will hold. But we were somewhat modest in what we were asking for, but I think that it begins to point at a possible future in which we can do away with a lot of the sort of mechanisms that currently dictate top-down urban design, and maybe even reverse that flow and have the communities themselves and the end users themselves begin to determine what it is that they themselves want. The technology is not necessarily there yet, but I think that's one possible kind of beautiful future, actually. So in engaging Kickstarter, we set ourselves a target goal of $100,000, not really knowing what was even remotely feasible. That's what we thought we needed to just build a full-size mock-up of like one sort of, like a core sample of the Lowline, right? And so within the first week we hit our goal. We ended up surpassing our goal by 50% or something like that. And it had any number of implications also in that, number one, we were able to raise money just out of nothing in order to execute this sort of prototype piece. But number two, it also served as something of a marketing piece. It spread the word, it got it out there in a really interesting way. All of a sudden throughout the city, I started seeing people wearing Lowline t-shirts. Or I started getting accosted by news crews on the street that, I'm just some normal guy. And this was kind of my favorite one. One of my favorite ones. Someone I think in China made a video game that was set in the Lowline because they had heard about it through Kickstarter. And also we awakened fears that we were going to awaken some sort of subterranean monster down there. This guy's from Lord of the Rings, by the way. So, having gotten our money in hand and our marketing out there, we took an abandoned warehouse space immediately adjacent to the site and began to figure out ways to just, in a very quick fashion, be able to deploy something on this level in that space, right? So what we looked to was very basic telescope technologies. If you fragment something into basically a hex mosaic, you can actually create some rather complex curve that would actually suit our needs in terms of what we need optically. So we began to model that out, created ultimately a system that involved over 600 anodized aluminum plates, each laser cut in Brooklyn, and began to install our collection systems, assemble this thing like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And here, this gives you some sort of sense of the scale that we were doing this prototype at. Hung it from the ceiling and at last plugged in the sun. And we were able to sort of create this immersive environment in which we simulated a small little portion of the Lowline. So on the one hand, what we did was use it as a tool to experiment with what we could do technologically and in terms of fabrication, but it was also an anthropological experiment to see how people actually would react to this. So we could study sort of the relative light levels and tinker with those and fine-tune what we were doing in terms of our capture and distribution of light. But also, we can see, okay, this is something that's completely new. How are human beings going to actually react to something like this? So it's an anthropological experiment too. And so for the 5 days in which we were open, we had over 11,000 visitors. We were by far the sort of most visited cultural institution in New York for just a very brief amount of time. It was a little bit like the circus came to town. Never gone. But I think it starts to point at a number of things, which is that yes, maybe we can actually use cast off, neglected, unthought about spaces for the public good. Maybe there's a way to use technology and design to actually turn these things into something that retains the spirit of the original building, but also creates something new that people actually want to be using. I think it maybe even more than that. I think it's on a sort of an urban level. This potentially allows an entire community of 600,000 people to sort of regain their soul and regain sort of a cultural connection point. And then, at least for me anyway, the idea that you could use this tool to actually begin to delve into our past and sort of reconnect with it, I think is incredibly powerful. So, okay, that's it. Thank you.
Coming here and showing this extraordinary piece of reuse, and also showing the potential of using other processes, because which we also discussed yesterday, it's also about designing the processes, how things are developed. Like you said, normally here it's very much top down, and so with Kickstarter, for example, which is also more or less imported from your country, I think it's a great opportunity, and we all have to be more conscious and also think we can do it, we can change something. This is also what we try to do with this project. Thank you very much. So we made it to the lunch break, and we will check the time that we